Hello, friends, and welcome to Simply Clouded, or let me say, welcome back to Simply Clouded, as this video is in continuation with the previous two videos where you first learned how to push a Docker image to a repository, and today you will learn how to use that Docker image with the task definition that you created in the second video to launch an ECS service in Fargate. The first step that we'll have to follow is to create a cluster. Now, there is a prerequisite here before you start creating your first cluster is that you need a service linked role. So you need to go to IAM and you need to actually create a role with the Elastic Container Service, and you need to select Elastic Container Service use case, which is going to create one IAM role, which is service linked. You'll not be able to launch a cluster without creating the service linked ECS role first. Now we'll create our first cluster. We'll just click on create cluster. We'll navigate to ECS service in our AWS console and we'll create our cluster. There are three options here, and we'll ignore the two options which involve an EC2 Linux or EC2 Windows because Fargate is a completely serverless solution, which translates to basically I don't care what kind of server I use, right? So now we'll choose the network only option, which is going to basically use Fargate to launch my cluster. Now I'll name the cluster as Fargate cluster. I have an optional option to create a VPC. If I don't, it will place my cluster in the default VPC as it goes with all the other EC2 instances that we create without specifying a VPC. So I'll just give the name of the cluster and I will correct the name of the cluster and I will just hit create. Now my cluster has been created, which is basically just the first step. A cluster is just an umbrella. It just holds my services and my tasks. So a task can be an independent task or it can be a part of a service. Now in a clustered setup, when you want to run multiple services, creating your service and placing a task inside the service is a pretty good idea. So we're going to do that. We're going to create our service and then we're going to place a task in our service and see if we're able to access the Jenkins application. The Jenkins was the application that I used the Docker image with. The Docker image that I used was Jenkins/Jenkins. I'm going to leave this link in the description of the video so that you can use it. Now, the status of my cluster is provisioning, so I'm going to pause this video until my cluster becomes available to me. If you notice, the status of my cluster has turned to active. Now I'll create my first Jenkins service inside my Fargate cluster and try to place a task inside that service. So we'll navigate to the services tab at the bottom of the cluster and we'll hit create. We'll select Fargate, of course, and then we'll use task definition. We'll come back to the revisions later in our next video. For now, we'll only choose the latest definition. The platform version, the cluster, you can give the service a name. Let's give it Jenkins service. Now the number of tasks are the number or the minimum count of the tasks that you want to place in your service. If it is two, when you launch your service, 2 tasks will be placed inside your service. For now, we'll go with 1. This number can be minimum 0. If you want to restart a service, you can always change this again once you've created your service. We'll start with 1. We'll just go to the next step. The second thing is now to give it a VPC. I'll just give it the default VPC because we didn't originally give the VPC to the cluster. Now we have the choice to give the service a specific VPC. And this VPC will be the VPC where our service will be placed. And the subnet, we can give multiple subnets if you want cross-region, cross-subnet, DR setup or something like that. Or if you want minimum latency in different availability zones and different regions or different subnets in one region, you can choose multiple subnets. Security group. I'm just going to edit the security group and I'm going to allow all traffic. So Jenkins usually works on 80/80. So I'm just going to select an existing group that I've already created, which allows all traffic. and I'm just going to pass it. Then I am assigning a public IP since I'm not going to go with the load balancing setup for now. So a load balancing setup basically gives me an option to create CNAME records, use Route 53, use DNS, use health checks, and whatnot. For now, I'm just going to use the basic tasks public IP to access the application. We'll just go down and we'll go to the next step. It is asking for us to have an optional auto scaling if you want that during the peak load hours or whenever your application is not able to keep up with the network traffic that it is getting, it automatically launches tasks. It will basically ask you what is the maximum number of tasks, what is the minimum number of tasks, and what is the task that you always want, which is the desired number of tasks. For now, I'm not going to adjust the service's desired count. I would just go with the one task that I am willing to launch. So if I click on next step and if I click on create service, my service has now been created. I do not need to specifically launch a task now. If I go to my service will automatically try to place a task inside. So you see, automatically a task has been launched inside my service. I will just pause the video and wait until the status of the task becomes active. Now, if you notice, the status of the task inside my service has changed to running. So let's navigate to the tasks detail page to get the public IP, which I can use to access my application. So if I copy this public IP, go to my browser, paste it, and pass the port 8080. This is the default port for Jenkins, which is binded with your host, or in this case, Fargate host, to the port 80 of its host. If I hit enter now, I will be able to launch the Jenkins application. So you see the Jenkins has been launched on my Fargate cluster. Of course, it takes some time to initialize Jenkins, but you see we're able to launch the application. Now, the one thing that you might think is that how do I restart this application? How do I find the first admin password of the application since I do not have the access? So you go to the task, you go to the logs of the task, and you will be able to find your first admin password when you're specifically using Jenkins. So any application that generates certain passwords or certain credentials on the first time you log into those applications, you can find them inside the logs of your cluster. In case you want to restart your application, if you want to launch the application again, you can just kill the task. Since your service is designed to have one minimum task, if you go back to your service and you refresh it a couple of times, it will automatically place another task inside. So I'm just going to pause the video until it places another task. So if you notice, another task has been placed inside the service within a matter of 10 seconds, and it is again in provisioning state. But in this case, the public IP of the task will change. So to keep a static address where you can reach your application, you will need a load balancing setup. Thank you guys. Launch your own applications, post your comments or your queries in the comments, and we'll come up with more such videos for ECS, ECR, and 1,000 other AWS services. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe for more such videos at Simply Clouded. To subscribe our channel, please hit the bell icon at the bottom.